welcome. I'm so happy to be here today to talk to you about my service learning project. Just 2 years ago, I was sitting in the same seats that you were, trying to figure out how I was going to turn my freshman seminar on news literacy into a permanent course. And after that conference, I left with so many ideas and teaching tools and inspiration from the Stony Brook faculty and other faculty around the country. And I hope that this conference and my presentation in a small way will do the same for you. And I'm going to move pretty quickly because I don't want to be one of those Academy Award winners drowned out by the music who went too long. So if I do leave out some details, we do have plenty of time built in to have some questions. So please save your questions. As I said, my course started out as a freshman seminar. And I knew to apply for a permanent course number, I needed to rework a lot of it because there was an overlap in terms of the history of a free press and some history of journalism with another course that we taught. And this was weighing very heavily on me last time I was here. But then I was exposed to the Stony Brook model, and I embraced it. And I urge all of you who have not set up your course to consider that. This is a tried and tested model. It really connects with students, and there really is no reason for you to reinvent the wheel. So please do consider that. My class is a permanent course now. It's geared towards non-journalism majors. It satisfies a post-freshman writing requirement. So I do get a lot of pre-med, econ, math, science type students. Thanks to Fred, who presented his service learning project 2 years ago, I was inspired to set up my own service learning component, which I'm going to be talking about today, and that's actually become a hallmark of the course and a feature that's very popular with students. Community engaged learning, this is what we call it at Emory. There's a lot of research to support it and a lot of benefits. First of all, it extends the classroom beyond the classroom. Anytime you can get students talking about ideas that you've introduced in the classroom, outside the classroom, it's a win-win. It also gives students an opportunity to get outside of we call it the Emory bubble at Emory, out into the real world, and can share your expertise with your community. In both of the schools that we taught in, there was nobody doing anything like news literacy or media literacy. And it also supports initiatives. We have one in Atlanta called Graduation Generation. This is a partnership between Emory University and Atlanta Public Schools, funded by a $1 million grant from an Emory alum, to help improve the academic success rate and graduation rates of middle school students in a specific neighborhood called the Edgewood neighborhood. So I was able to apply for a grant and received a grant to set up a pilot in the Cohen Middle School. This is about 20 minutes from Emory, 325 students. We actually taught 30 7th graders and 8th graders. The demographics of the school are 98% black, 98% eligible for free school lunch, and about 25% in some type of remedial or special education. These are students that have a 70% dropout rate. So they're targeting them starting in 6th grade through programs that Emory is doing with faculty and professors. And it seems to be going well. I added Druid Hills High School when I doubled the size of my class in the fall because we work in teams of 4 students, so we had extra students to do another school. This is a much larger high school and more diverse. We worked with actually 25 juniors and seniors who were, whoops, let me zoom through that, who were in a journalism program and definitely going to college. So 2 very different audiences in terms of the middle school and the high school. Well, once I got Emory on board, I had to convince the schools that this was a worthwhile program for them. And the biggest thing I had going for me was that media literacy is a component of the Common Core Georgia Performance Standards. And this is something definitely to look into in your state. Media literacy, if it is part of the Common Core, means you can get into the classroom during the day. And that's significant because otherwise you have to meet with students after school and you definitely won't reach as many students. All the other reasons about why we teach news literacy to college students apply to middle school and high school students. The schools are very big on critical thinking skills. This obviously is a critical thinking skill to be able to evaluate news, find reliable information. Also developing those news consumer habits early. There are a lot of studies and research done. A book, in fact, called Tuned Out by David Mindich, that if you're not consuming news as a teenager or a young adult, you probably will not be a regular news consumer as you get older. Prosumer future, we're all prosumers. The students are as well. We want them to be responsible when they share information and discriminating when they're consuming it. And this role model opportunity was also very important to the schools, where these students had the opportunity to interact with Emory students who were positive role models. We divided the curriculum into the 4 main concepts: what is news, who decides what is news, truth and verification, and then news versus opinion. And the presentations at both schools followed the same format. They did a PowerPoint first and then an activity. We were in the high school for 2 hours at a time, so those presentations were longer and the activities were longer. For the middle school students, I asked the Emory students to follow the 10, 20, 30 rule. No more than 10 slides, no more than a 20-minute presentation, and no font smaller than 30, so there wasn't too much writing on the screen. But where the students really shone was coming up with these activities, competitive activities for the students to play, to reinforce what we had taught them, not only that week, but the previous weeks. And here's some examples. News literacy bingo was one of the games. This is a game where we talked about who decides what is news, and each team got a t-shirt. I don't know if you can see it. It's called the Cohen Times. And the students researched what was the big news going on at the school. I remember pizza was about to be taken off the lunch menu. That was a big story. And they had these headlines from all the different things going on. And the students had to choose the top 3 headlines for the front of the t-shirt, which represented the front of the newspaper, and then put the other stories on the back of the t-shirt, which represented the inside of the newspaper. And then they had to get up in front of the class and defend their decisions. So this is a great activity. There was movement, laughter, arguing, and the students were really into it. For high school, we definitely had more sophisticated activities. This was a news versus opinion class, and for the activity, they deconstructed an opinion piece and a news story on the same topic, working in small groups with Emory students. And what was great about this is after this session, they asked their teacher if they could include opinion pieces in their next monthly newspaper. So, that just grew organically out of that lesson. Here's our last class at Cohen. And this class also asked their teacher to do a newsletter after we finished our sessions with them. Also just grew organically. As for the outcomes for Emory students, well, this definitely reinforced their news literacy skills. There's nothing like teaching something, we all know, to really learn it well. It also helped them demonstrate what they learned more creatively through the PowerPoints, through the activities, and also gave them a chance to reflect on what the experience meant to them. And that's a very important part of experiential learning. It's a component that we require at Emory, really having that reflection. And you'll see in the assignment that I passed out, I included many opportunities for the students to reflect: an essay, a class presentation, and a digital story, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It also taught them how to do a digital story. Most of them had never done anything like that, and gave them the opportunity to experience community engaged learning, and many of them continued to work with the Cohen School after our project ended. For the Cohen and Druid Hills High School students, all the things you expect. They were becoming more aware of their own news consumption. They were more critical in their news consumption. They were more careful about what they retweeted and passed on, and they did have these positive role models from Emory students. As for lessons learned, well, contact the school's principal way before the semester before you want to get in there. I can't tell you how slowly things move in public schools. Do work with student groups that are just 3 to 4. The pilot program, some of my groups were 5, 6, and 7. That was too big, and the work ended up on just a couple of students. So 3 to 4 students is really the sweet spot. Spend more class time on the activity than the PowerPoint. This is what the students, both middle school and high school, enjoyed most, was the activity. Meet with students twice. Initially, I just met with students once to talk about the scope of the lecture and the activity, but then some mistakes got into the presentation, so now I meet with them twice. They actually run through the presentation and the game with me so we can make sure the technology works. Consult with the classroom teacher after each session. It's very important to debrief the teacher. You don't know what you don't know. The first day at Cohen School, 2 of my female students showed up in short shorts and flip-flops, which completely violated the dress code at the middle school. So that is good information to know. and definitely have each team do a debrief to the class to share best practices and information like that. The last thing I'll say, it does take a lot of time. The weeks that we were actually teaching and getting ready, I probably spent 20 hours on this project, but it is very rewarding. And here is my digital story.
What do journalists like Anderson Cooper, Katie Couric, and Justin Farmer have in common? They are all experts in news literacy and follow the guidelines of truth and verification. In order to be successful in journalism, aspiring journalists must be experts in the concept of news literacy. The aspiring journalists in Druid Hills High School's journalism class were exposed to this concept through Emory news literacy students' presentations on various related subjects, like truth and verification. News literacy is a set of skills that allow news consumers to sift through different types of news and be able to determine which news stories are credible, accurate, and informing. The most important concept to master in news literacy is truth and verification. Our group met up several times to discuss how we would teach truth and verification and what activity we would create to test the students' knowledge. We decided to use a PowerPoint presentation to teach this lesson to the Druid Hills High School students.
After weeks of preparation, our group finally felt prepared, but as we walked inside the school, we were nervous about the presentation and how the class would react. When we first walked into the classroom, we were welcomed by the eager faces of the journalism students at Druid Hills High School. Their enthusiasm calmed our nerves. Each member of our group taught the students about the key aspects of truth and verification, which are types of quotes, sources, evidence, and how to evaluate them. We use acronyms like I'm vain to teach the students the 5 sourcing rules and compared and contrast quotes to explain the 3 types of quotations. Our group also used stories related to pop culture to help explain how to evaluate sources, which is one of the key lessons of truth and verification. The students and even the teachers seemed to enjoy the stories about celebrities.
After our presentation, we played Are You Smarter Than a Journalist to put what the students have learned to the test. They were split into 3 groups and paired with an Emory student. We asked them questions like, what is the difference between assertion and fact? Although we ran into some technical difficulties, the students seemed to be engaged and participated in the game. Since all of the students demonstrated how much they learned about truth and verification, we gave all of them candy. They seemed to really enjoy this part. Teaching was harder than we thought, and we all agreed we should have practiced our presentation together a few more times.
Another thing we could have done differently was play the game ourselves before playing it with the journalism students. If we'd done this, we probably would have picked up on the errors we made in the game setup. Throughout this assignment, our group realized it's never too early to start being a critical news consumer. After interacting with the journalism students at Druid Hills High School, it's apparent that they are well-prepared aspiring journalists. Our group was thrilled with how quickly they learned the material. Listening to the students work with their team members to solve the questions during the game was definitely the most rewarding part of the teaching experience. They thought critically like professional journalists and discussed the caveats in truth and verification.
As a journalism student for over 3 years, it was fun to put my skills to the test and teach what I have learned over the years. Teaching was exhilarating, but it was more complicated than I anticipated.
The most enjoyable part of this experience was interacting with the students. I loved hearing their opinions about sourcing and journalism. Their views made me see journalism in a new light.
My favorite part of our presentation was the game our group played with the students. I really enjoyed interacting with the students, and I was overjoyed when they could answer the questions correctly without my assistance. I loved watching them demonstrate their knowledge. Our group hopes that the students at Druid Hills High School learned as much about truth and verification as we did from teaching it. Through our lesson, we hope that the students are one step closer to becoming the next Anderson Coopers and Katie Courics.